emotional and relational sides of money, so much so that I wrote an entire book about it. So
Can you show
called
us
Money.
your book?
Yeah, I do. I have it here. It's called Money is Emotional, Prevent Your Heart from Hijacking Your Wallet. And actually, if anyone's tuning in, they can download the first 3 chapters for free at moneyisemotional.com. I jokingly say it's like the least boring personal finance book you'll ever read because it's half tabloid of my life as I crashed and burned financially. But it's also the practical how-tos of, really becoming and staying financially healthy. But the twist in there is always understanding the emotional undercurrents of all the different areas of personal finance, because once we get a hold of that, that's when we can really make permanent changes to our finances.
So what was the first change you had to make personally when you had your first aha, let's say?
Well, first of all, I had to admit that I needed help.
Okay.
And that what I was doing was not working. And that's probably the hardest step to take, because there is a lot of shame and embarrassment and judgment that people can feel around their finances. And this isn't something that's just for people who are making lower incomes. I have a lot of my clients make 6 figures, but they have mismanaged their money for so long, as their income grew, their habits never changed. And so they still spent everything that they made, and they still were using debt too much. And so, imagine being a doctor or an attorney and having to say, I can't do this. Like, I might be smart, but I obviously can't figure this out on my own. And I think that's probably the hardest step that anybody has to take.
So we're in a really emotional time right now, where a lot of interesting, things are happening and people are making some decisions, and it's very difficult. Can you talk about some ways that you are seeing or noticing that people are handling their money differently because of the pandemic and what it's doing? I know we started off and we had to buy a whole bunch of stuff maybe some people did or did not have money for.
Right.
But there are some other things maybe that you've noticed about how people are faring.
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing that we always need to keep in mind is we don't want to make financial decisions from a place of panic. So, just because somebody else is doing something, say taking money out of their 401k or deferring their student loan payments, or, trying to get a 90-day pushback on their car loan or whatever. The most important thing for anybody to do in this situation is to really dig in and figure out exactly what's going on with their personal finances, because most people aren't tracking their spending. Most people, they have like this vague idea of how they're doing, but they really don't know what they're spending on all the various categories. Or if I just pointed out and said, like, hey, Sherman, like, how much money do you need to run your household every month? Like, what is that number? Most people couldn't answer that question. And so that's the first thing that has to be done is, you got to get everything in one place, whether you're doing it electronically or just putting it down on a piece of paper, because, if your income has been cut, well, what does that mean, right? Does that mean, we're short $2,000 or are we short $500, right? Because the decisions we make based off of that information might be completely different. So we really can't make good, solid decisions about anything until we do that step first. So that's really the first step for everyone if they're not already doing that, because you can't make good decisions if you don't have good information.
So do you have a recommended way or tool? I know that, there are websites like mint.com.
Yes.
There are, budgeting tools at a place like daveramsey.com. And I think that you also have some kind of a budgeting tool that you might be able to share with us.
Yeah, so my favorite, it's called Ask Zeta, AskZeta.com. It's 100% free. It is designed for couples, but single people can also use it. It's something that I use with all of my clients. And, it's relatively easy to use. It pulls in all the information from your various bank accounts, and you can see all of your spending in one place. So I think, especially for a couple, it has advantages over something like Mint, because with Mint, there's only one login, right? So like, it doesn't allow for sharing of information. Whereas with Ask Zeta, like, you can log in, Sherman, and you can link all your accounts, and you might have, let's say you have a savings account that's just yours. Well, you can say, I want to have all these accounts pulled in, but I just want to see this one myself, right? You can actually do that with Ask Zeta, which I think is really great for engaged couples.
Okay.
Who are like in the process of combining. So, you know me, I am someone who is like full transparency. Like, once you get married, you should be able to see everything. There's no hiding. But I do like the functionality of Ask Zeta because it facilitates communication. So like, if you logged in and you saw a charge for Amazon, you could actually send a note and say, hey, Sherman, what was this for? And then he could reply back and put the right code in there. So it actually helps couples talk about money, which I think is really cool. And it's free, so that's even better.
Free is good.
Free is good.
It's interesting what you're saying. I was listening to somebody somewhere, and they were talking about how the COVID-19 is causing divorce. I was reading an article about that in China. And then I was looking at another documentary, in particular about African-American families and couples, and how staying together is a mark of economic success.
Mm. Yeah.
And that when people divorce, generally one of the two partners fares much worse. And a lot
usually
of that is the female.
Yes, it's usually the women.
And you have some experience with that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I will say this, like, no one wins financially in a divorce. No one, right? Because essentially you are dividing the assets and you're multiplying the expenses, right? Because now you were sharing a mortgage. Now you're both going to have rent and mortgage. So no one comes out a financial winner in a divorce. However, women usually do take the brunt of it for a couple of reasons. Many times they have exited the workplace to raise children. So, they're missing out on those regular, advancements in raises that, someone who has a continuous, work history is going to have those, those pay increases and those promotion opportunities. So that is one of the other reasons. Plus, we know there's still a pay gap, right? So that's the unfortunate fact of the situation. But in those situations, here's what I have seen. Money can certainly be a stressor in marriage, but if you can communicate regularly with your spouse about money, that is a strengthener in your marriage. And so those couples who commit to talking about money on a regular basis, and put in the work to improve their finances. I mean, I've had clients come to me and say, like, our marriage is so much better since we did this coaching with you. And it's not really because of anything I did. It's the fact that they committed to doing the work and to doing it together. Yeah.
I'm sure it's something you did and they committed to.
Well, I might have had a little bit to do with it.
Because, they say that the top three separators are communication, sex, and money.
Yeah.
And so right now, people are under maybe some stress over money because being furloughed, because of being laid off, You know, some people got their stimulus checks already, people for whom it could go directly into the deposit. Some
Yeah.
people are still waiting.
Yeah.
For some people, the differentiation between the $600 a week that they're getting for unemployment, or some people haven't even gotten that yet. So there are some people that are literally in a panic right now,
Right.
whether single or married.
Right.
And, you know, some gurus have said, you know, use credit cards as a temporary fix. People might be going to pawn shops or to payday advance places, or trying to get home equity lines of credit, or all kinds of different things for this situation that has been lasting for about 6 or 7 weeks now. We don't know how long it's going to last.
Mhm.
So what is your advice for somebody that might be in an emotional panic right now because of money?
Yes. Well, some of those things that you have said have pushed some of my emotional buttons because I've had experience with them. Payday lenders, avoid them like the plague. Seriously. I mean, I would rather someone go donate plasma or, you know, I mean, anything other than that. And I just know because I got caught in a terrible cycle of the payday lenders. And this was back before they could like instantaneously check your bank account. I think the technical term for it is like check kiting, because I was like borrowing one to pay from another I mean, it is a terrible cycle to get caught into. And honestly, I feel like it should be illegal, because they're really preying upon people who are in a desperate situation and have lower levels of financial literacy, right? Because if you really look at the numbers and see the dollars and how much you're paying to borrow that money, it's insane. It like literally doesn't make any sense. You know, the pawn shop, if you're selling something that you don't need and you don't want, you know, I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. You know, I know people are, you know, selling stuff on Facebook Marketplace or whatever. You know, if you've got stuff that can be liquidated into cash and it's stuff that you don't need, I'm certainly not against doing that. But, you know, making these decisions out of a place of panic, that rarely ends up well. So one of the things,
what about the credit cards? You know, running up your credit cards because it's a temporary situation. You haven't got, I know, look at your neck.
Don't do it. No. You know, the worst thing to do when you don't have an income is to put yourself further in debt. It's just, you know, it's not going to turn out well, right? You know, everything else that you can exhaust before that. You know, I don't know why some people's unemployment has gone through and other people's hasn't, right? I mean, I'm not sure what the glitches in the system are. I know I've heard of issues on, you know, pretty much all the states here in this area. And the systems are just bogged down in general too. So, you know, it's unfortunate. But, you know, if people are needing things like food or assistance with utilities and things of that nature, there are a lot of local resources. There are a lot of local churches and local charities that can help with those kinds of things. I would rather someone, you know, admit that they need help and get that help than run up a credit card that they may or may not be able to pay later on.
Yeah, that gets back to the emotional quotient. Where are they emotionally? Because that's, again, you have to release the fact that you're going to have to tell somebody you're in this problem. That can be challenging. I've been in that place before, and the swiping was so much easier in the moment. You know, that
right.
Unfortunately, concrete thinking rather than thinking abstractly toward the future.
Right. Yes, it's hard for us to do that because, you know, typically if we're in a situation where we're feeling pain, and we can include shame and embarrassment in that, you know, in those negative feelings, we typically want to do anything that we can to relieve it immediately. rather than thinking about what's going to be the best thing long term. So I'll always tell people, take a deep breath and then ask yourself, will I be happy that I made this decision a year from now or 5 years from now?
That's great.
Chances are you're probably going to be like, no, I know I shouldn't do this. Now, it is okay if you're in a tight spot and you need to just pay the minimums on your credit cards. So if you're somebody who, has always paid off your credit cards in full every month and all of a sudden you're laid off, don't feel bad about having to drop back and pay the minimum for a couple of months until you're back on your feet. So, I'm certainly not opposed to that.
Well, we want to welcome everybody to the Tuesday Table Talk. This is Sherman and Sadell Bradley from the Warehouse Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we have our guest, Christine Luken, the financial lifeguard. And she is to help us who are drowning in financial situations due to the pandemic. And Christine, it's noted that 40% of Americans do not have $400 for an emergency. They don't have that kind of cash on hand. Yeah. And that's a large percentage of people. When we think about, what the Bible talks about in terms of, saving, and Proverbs talking about, look at the ant saves for, the rainy day, the ant saves for the time where he has to burrow. And that saving is as much a part of Christian life as giving. Stewardship is important to God. Why do you think that we don't have any savings? And what can we do if we might have some extra income right now because we haven't been driving anywhere and we've saved money on gas and all that? What can we do to save some money?
Yeah. So I think the reasons why people don't save money is, first of all, it's not glamorous, right? It's much more fun to, go buy the latest pair of shoes or a new iPhone or whatever the case may be. Saving money isn't something that our current society really values. But we also have biology working against us. So there's something called present bias, and it is a carryover from our caveman days. So if you think about it, back when we were running around in animal skins, if you had a small animal close by that you could easily catch and kill, your brain was hardwired to do that versus some large animal that you could see 2 miles off in a distance that you may or may not be able to catch and kill. Mm-hmm. And so it was really about survival to prioritize a sure reward today over a potentially greater reward in the future that we may or may not get. And I think sometimes just understanding that about ourselves to say like, oh, it's not just because I'm a bad person or I'm weak and I don't have any discipline. Our biology is literally working against us when it comes to savings. So I advocate a couple different things. First of all, automatic transfers. Set up your discipline on autopilot. And even if you have to start with $10 a week, right? And of course, I should say, actually, step 0 is open a savings account.
Okay.
There are so many people, clients who are making close to 6 figures, and I say, how much do you have in savings? Nothing. Do you have a savings account? Well, I was going to open one when I have something to put in it. No, you have to open it so you can put something in it. Like opening the account is the first thing. And so, if you have a bank account anywhere, you can probably open a savings account right online, and you can start with $10. Start wherever you need to and set that up every time you get paid, have that small amount come out. When that gets comfortable, just start bumping it up and keep bumping it up. And it's out of sight, out of mind.
And so I want to invite anybody who has a question to ask it in the chat. But how much do people need to have saved?
So the amount's going to scare you, but it's 6 months of your living expenses is what you need in emergency savings. So first of all, we have to go back to what I talked about, assessing your situation and really understanding how much money does it take every month to pay all the bills? So you have to know that number first in order to calculate what is 6 months. Now, I always start with some micro goals, right? Because, if that number is 18,000, you might be like, oh my God, like, how am I ever going to save that much money, right? Well, let's start with 1 month.
Okay.
What is 1 month of your expenses? Let's let that be the first goal. And then, of course, once we reach that, then we can bump it up to 2 and so on. Because sometimes when people see that big number, they're just like, they just shut down. They're like, that's impossible. I'll never save that much money. So why even bother, right? So let's start with 1 month. And that's typically what I recommend people have saved, is at least 1 month before you start tackling debt. So I know the advice has been around for a long time, like save at least $1,000 and then start tackling your debt. That advice is over 20 years old, right? I mean, $1,000, we can blow through that for an emergency.
Yeah.
Real easy. You've got a car breakdown, you'll be lucky if it's just $1,000 to get it fixed, right?
And right now, people's average rent in the United States is over $1,000.
Yeah.
So you're not getting anywhere with just $1,000. You're right.
Yeah. So that's why I advocate at least 1 month. So, but having those little interim goals, and I know that saving for emergencies, it doesn't seem like it's fun, and so sometimes it's hard to emotionally motivate us to do it. Because one of the things that I do advocate with my clients is, those long-term goals that you're saving for, to like imagine them in as great a detail as possible so that you get excited about saving for it. So whether it's vacation or your kid's college, like really imagine that thing happening, and what does it look like, and what are you wearing, and what does the air smell like? But it's hard to do that for emergencies, right? Because nobody gets excited about spending money for emergencies.
Right.
So sometimes we have to kind of inverse that and say, let me really remember the last time I had an emergency and I didn't have the money to cover it.
Mm-hmm.
I can still remember that, back when I was with my ex. I mean, whenever there was an emergency, there were 2 emergencies, right? We had a car problem, but we also had a money problem because we didn't have any money to fix the car, right? So that feeling of panic and terror, like sometimes we need to think and remind ourselves, this is why I'm doing this, so I can avoid this pain in the future.
Yeah.
So we can use emotion to our advantage.
Yes, I like the example of AAA. AAA, you pay monthly, and you don't see it, and you may not think it's as beneficial. And oftentimes, it's one of the first things that people get rid of when they want to try to save money. But boy,
right.
Be in the snow or the rain on the highway, if something happens and there's nobody, you don't have cell service, or you can't get a hold of anybody. That is, I've been there. And so, yeah, we have to teach. What?
Nothing. I'm sorry.
we have to teach people delayed gratification and think ahead. And that's a challenge. Delayed gratification, that whole concept is, everybody doesn't grow up with it. And then some grow up with it and still don't like it.
No, it's not. And it's like, it's hard to make the decision now that you're going to be happy with later.
But it's also, when you have that month of cushion or runway in business terms, when you are in the pandemic and you are able to go and stockpile all of your, hand sanitizer, toilet paper, without it breaking you.
Yes.
And the feeling that, hey, I know that I could last for 3 months. If I had to go get a different job or something had to happen, I would have some time to give myself to think about it and to change it. That feeling is kind of priceless.
It is. And that's why I sometimes call the emergency fund your anti-anxiety pill for your finances.
So now you also talked about some other anti-anxiety medicine, which is the idea of insurances.
Yes.
Right now,
Yeah.
you people with sicknesses and health insurance is a big thing. For some people who are losing, their jobs, something like afloat might be a big thing, or life insurance for people who may unfortunately be dealing with folks who passed away. Can you talk about that as something that is helpful for everybody?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I tell people is, during times of crisis, we have to be cautious not to cancel those type of policies, because it can seem like, well, I'm healthy now, or, I'm only 30 or I'm only 40, I can get life insurance, I can cancel it for now and pick it back up later. That can be pretty dangerous, right? Because what I tell people is, when you do stuff like that, you're basically exposing yourself to thousands to tens of thousands of dollars of risk just to save a few bucks right now. And so, unless you're in a position to where you can't pay your rent, we need to look at those policies as really necessities. And that's something that I talk to my clients, like, as they're graduating out of my coaching program. We want to make sure that those various things are in place. And there's one that I see that's missing from a lot of people, and that's disability insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And we really should call it income insurance.
Yes.
Because I think I'm thinking the statistic is somewhere between 30 and 35% of adults will experience some period of short-term disability during their working years. So it might be because they had a surgery, or, they were in a car accident, or, had a difficult pregnancy, whatever. It might not be what we classically think of as a disability, but, especially if you don't have 6 months of your expenses in savings, that's absolutely vital. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, if people are traditionally employed, I will say that's the least expensive and easiest way to get it, is through your employer.
Yeah, I that just brings back a very painful memory of allowing insurance to lapse. And it was my renter's insurance when I was in an apartment.
Oh, no.
I got the great advice to acquire and had some financial challenges and moved from one place to another and needed to reestablish it. And I put it off, and the apartment was struck by lightning in one storm and caught on fire.
Oh, no.
Yeah, lost everything. Found myself back home with my father.
So what do you want to say to everybody right now watching this?
Don't avoid the necessity of renter's insurance.
Or any
any insurance. But for those that don't have a home yet, you often aren't thinking about insuring an apartment or the possessions that you have in an apartment. And It wasn't an elaborate apartment. I didn't have very expensive things, but they were mine.
Yeah.
And they were lost, and it was painful.
Yes. Well, in all honesty, renter's insurance is not terribly expensive either. It's one of the cheaper insurances that you can.
Thanks for putting that out there.
Well, I mean, sometimes when you're struggling and you are broke, it seems like everything is expensive. So if I don't have any money, then $10 is too much money. If I don't have any money, then $100 is $1 million. And so, there are some emotional kinds of foibles that in a lot of cases we as African Americans unfortunately have. There's a lack of trust. There have been situations historically where banks have done some not so great things, particularly with our community, gouging us, taking money, those kind of things. And so we have some people who won't engage a bank at all.
Right.
And so the question of is money safe in the bank?
Yeah.
It's better for me to have it in my mattress or whatever have you. Can you talk about that?
Well, so, if you've got a large amount of money, I don't know anywhere safer currently to put it than in a bank. You know, the bank can't just come in and steal your money, right? I mean, that's not the way the banking system works. You know, I think things have come a long way, as far as being more customer service friendly and all of that good stuff, especially at the more local community banks and credit unions. You know, my husband and I bank with a credit union, and I mean, it's member owned. So essentially, like, we own a little piece of it, which is pretty cool, which means, you know, we get good rates on things, and, you know, they might not have 1,000 locations, but, you know, it's people that we trust. So that is important. And, you know, there may need to be like some emotional issues around that, around trust, that might need to be explored there. But, you know, you really need to be careful about having cash in your house. If you are going to have cash in your house, you need to make sure it's in a safe that can't just be picked up and pulled out of the house, because, you know, cash can be stolen. If something like lightning strikes and your apartment burns down and you don't have it in a fireproof safe, then it's essentially completely worthless, right? So now with that,
so there may be opportunities to have maybe like, you know, a few $100s or something like that in case something were to happen, but nothing that's like super significant. You know, there is this thing called the FDIC that people may not have ever heard of, which is, what's it called? The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. That is the government's kind of insurance on all the deposits that are in banks and credit union saving loans, those that are FDIC insured. And they insure our deposits up to $250,000, in some cases more, based on whatever, you know, certain kinds of deposits. And so really, you know, your money is somewhat insured when it's in the bank, even if something should happen.
Right.
And so we want people to learn how to have practices that are good for their long-term financial security.
Right.
And engaging, you know, insurance, engaging savings, engaging banks, you know, understanding how to use credit is all a part of that. We have a question here that says, for someone who's already started to work on their personal finances in light of the pandemic, what would be 3 main things to focus on in this time to stay financially fit?
Yeah. So, you know, going back to just understanding what your expenses are, that is, you know, tracking and understanding exactly what's going on. So one of the things that I would recommend is what I call the weekly money date. So during this weekly money date, if you're married, then you should do it with your spouse, especially at least in the beginning, until you know, kind of get your hands around what's going on. And essentially that's the time where you look at your spending versus your goals. You transfer any money into savings, pay any bills that need to be paid, and have those discussions with your spouse about what is going on with the finances. Because, you know, just doing that once a month, I don't think is enough. Because, you know, if you guys sit down and you make a plan for May, and then you don't sit down again until the end of May, you know, you might start getting off track, you know, around the 5th or the 6th or the 7th. And if you're not looking at it, you don't know. And like when you look at it again, you're like, oh, we just completely screwed up. You know, like this budgeting stuff doesn't work.
So budgeting and tracking finances, having the weekly meeting is number 1.
Yes. You know, number 2 is really committing to saving, you know, because that is really what's going to insulate you from emergencies, and committing to that savings habit. And the third thing I would say is to make sure that the level of debt that you're carrying is comfortable for you. So, I'm not necessarily against credit cards or against having a car loan. I'm not going to jump out of the bushes with a big pair of scissors and make you cut up your credit cards. That's not me. But we have to understand that with debt comes responsibility. So the way that I like to describe it is in fitness terms. So Sherman, if I handed you a 2-pound weight and I said, you have to carry this with you everywhere that you go, that wouldn't be a big deal for you. You probably just like throw it in your backpack or your briefcase, or it might even be small enough to, fit into your pocket. And you probably forget about it, right? It wouldn't feel weighty. But if I put a 50-pound weight and I strapped it to your back and I said, you have to carry this with you everywhere you go today. I mean, that would make even easy things like bending over to tie your shoe seem nearly impossible. So debt is pretty much the same way. And depending on your financial muscle, that is going to determine how much debt you can comfortably carry. So by financial muscle, I mean income and net worth. So, if there's a doctor who makes $300,000 a year and he has $50,000 in student loan debt, comparatively, that weight really is going to feel like that 2-pound weight to him. But if you've got somebody else over here who's maybe making $75,000 a year and they have $50,000 in student loan debt, that's going to feel like it's crushing them, right? So it's all relative. And, we really have to be honest with ourselves and say, first of all, can I trust myself to handle credit responsibly? And if you can't, that's okay. If you feel like you have to cut up the credit card, at least temporarily, to break that emotional spending cycle, that's okay. So that's the first thing. Can I even trust myself with the credit card? And then second of all, what is that maximum weight for me? So for example, I have a credit card that only has $1,000 limit. Like I could easily get one with a much higher limit, but I'm like, you know what? I don't really want that temptation.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm going to do.
I think it's important to know that, the Bible talks about that the rich rules over the poor and the borrower is the slave or the servant to the lender.
Yes.
Now, when we have a lot of debt, whether it's credit card debt, whether it's school loan debt, whether it's even our mortgage or our car loan, that then we begin to work. And really we are working for the people that we owe the money.
Yes.
Even when we borrow from our relatives.
Yeah.
And then there's this borrower slave relationship that starts getting, or our friends, and you feel uncomfortable every time you see them because you owe them money, you owe them money, and you've created this chasm.
Right.
And if you want to have a healthy relationship with yourself, healthy relationships with others, and if you want to be working to build, your own family's empire or whatever, then you can't have all of the money that you work for be going to a creditor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's also why the Bible says don't lend money. Just don't lend it, give it. Let it
Yeah. Yeah. That's my philosophy, because when you lend money, it changes the relationship. And you might be like, well, no, it doesn't. Like, I don't feel like it's changing the relationship. Well, it doesn't matter. It's a spiritual principle. Yeah. It does change the relationship. And, I've had experiences in my past where I've lent friends money and I expected them to pay me back and they didn't, and we're not friends anymore. Right. And so after that happened, I basically said, okay, I'm never lending anybody money unless I won't be mad if they never pay me back. Right. So first of all, you got to ask, can you afford to lend this person money? Right. Yeah. Because if they don't pay you back, is that going to hurt your credit? Is that going to mean that you can't pay your bill? And then on top of that, you just being mad at them. Right.
Right. That's why the Bible says, do not co-sign
Right.
for people's loans.
Oh,
Because
preach it, sister.
if they already have bad credit habits, they're going to have bad credit habits, and then you're going to be paying the price for them. And so I think that this is yes, sir. Go ahead.
A question. What would you say to a homeowner who's listening and says, you know what, I don't have the emergency fund, but how about I go take out a HELOC, home line of credit, and that way I've automatically got a place for an emergency if something happens. Until I can save money up, I've got an outlet.
Yeah, so I don't advocate using credit as your emergency fund. So, I think a home equity line of credit is a little bit different because usually, it's approved for a certain amount and it's kind of locked in. But I just had this conversation with a friend of mine. She had her credit limit on her Visa knocked down from $9,000 to $1,000. And she found out at the grocery store. It was like, the card wasn't going through, and she's like, what the hell is going on here? So she called the bank, and what happened was there was an old medical bill from her son, that was her responsibility, that she didn't even know about, that had gone to collections.
Wow. Because
they had moved. And we were just talking, and she's like, well, thank God I wasn't like depending on that credit card. She had savings in the bank. So, if you're depending on credit, just understand that the bank can change that amount and they can lower it whenever they want to for any reason and for no reason at all. So that's not a good thing to depend on. And certainly, incurring more debt against your house, that's not something that I recommend.
So now, if you're in these problems, since you're talking about the creditors' abilities, creditors also have the ability to lower interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
Creditors actually, might have the ability to forgive. Collectors might have the ability to forgive. How should a person who's in trouble during this pandemic interact with people that they owe?
Well, first of all, you should be proactive and make sure that you are initiating that communication with them. There are a lot of financial institutions that are extending some different things to help people out, but it's really important that you understand the terms and conditions before you decide to defer mortgage payments or defer car payments. So those programs aren't federally mandated. It's basically each bank gets to decide what they're going to do, if anything. So, if they're saying like, oh, if you've lost your job because of COVID-19, we'll defer your mortgage payment for 90 days. Well, what happens after the 90 days?
Right.
Because in some instances, they say, oh, you have a balloon payment and you have to pay us the 3 months at that time. Well, that's not helpful, right? That's not helpful at all. Now, if they're going to put it at the end of, they basically say, okay, we're going to let you skip 3 payments and then we're going to tack those payments at the end of the loan, then that might be a different story. So really having those open lines of communication with your creditors, and just be honest with them and say, look, here's my income, here's my necessities. I have creditors that say I owe them, $1,200 a month, and I've only got $400 left. Mm-hmm. So what can you do to help me out?
So in the same kind of discussion, we've got a lot of discussion around student loans right now. We had a question about student loans rebuilding credit. The person is currently in default on their college loans. The regular payment is almost $800 a month that they can't do right now. Is there anything that they can do? This issue with a student loan is really, messing with their credit. And if they default, even if the government decided, which I don't know that they will, to forgive student loans, would they cause it not to be forgiven for people who are in default?
Yeah, so I had shared a couple links with you in the chat box, so I hope we can share those across the different channels. So first of all, I don't think that student loans are going to be forgiven. And here's why. Student loan debt is the largest financial asset of the US government.
Wow.
It's not their largest asset. I mean, obviously our government owns land and planes and ships, but the largest financial asset that our government owns is student loans. They can't forgive them.
Wow.
They can't do it. They'd run out of money. So that's not going to happen. I tell people, you got to make a plan. You got to make a plan and you got to start paying on them. If you're in a situation right now where, I know right now, basically student loan payments have been suspended, where they're basically saying there's nothing due. And, if your situation dictates that, okay, this is a good thing for me because now I don't have that payment, then that's fine. But this is also a golden opportunity for people who can make their payments, because if they make their payments right now, they can have 100% of it go towards the principal.
Oh, that's great.
And so that would actually make up some ground for them and cut some time off the back end of those student loans, because that's really, just paying them as planned is going to take forever. You got to pay extra on them to get them knocked out. That's the only way it's going to happen. I have not dealt with anyone who has had student loans in default. So that's why I sent that link over where it actually talks about how you can re-engage in the process to get them reinstated and start paying them again. But the fact of the matter is, you have to deal with it. You can't ignore it. It's not going away. Student loans cannot be discharged via bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And if it's a federal student loan, they can take your tax refund money. They can basically search your social security number and take any money that you've got out of banks. If you owe the government money, they're going to get it. I mean, it's like owing the IRS money. So you can't ignore that problem. You have to be proactive and deal with it. You can't run from it.
So here's another question from a widow. My house was foreclosed when my husband died.
Oh no.
How can I start to turn things around if I want to one day buy a house, or I want to one day own a business?
Yeah. So with foreclosure, obviously that stays on your record for a while. But, you have to look at the overall picture. Is that like the only black mark on her credit, or is there a lot of other accounts that were in collections, right? If that was the only thing and she continues to pay all of her other obligations on time, I think lenders are going to take that into account, right? But if she's got a whole bunch of collections outstanding in addition to that foreclosure, then she's got a lot of work ahead of her to start cleaning that stuff up.
And we have some resources if people are having those kinds of problems with credit, need credit repair. We have some resources that we can help you. We can give you to some people that really do a great job at helping people climb out of these kinds of situations and get themselves back stable, whether your situation is due to the pandemic or whether it was prior to the pandemic, and you really just want to straighten up your finances. We have some folks that can help you out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important. Getting the help, as you mentioned from the very beginning, you have to be open and willing to allow someone to help.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the other thing to keep in mind too is that even once you receive that help to fix your credit, etc., we have to change the habits that got us there in the first place. Right? Because otherwise we're just going to be back in that same situation. And unfortunately, I saw that with my mother-in-law, God rest her soul. But she was just one of those people who just spent and did whatever she wanted to, and she just didn't really even think about the consequences. And that meant that she filed bankruptcy in her 60s, and by the time she passed away in her mid 70s, she had already paid a deposit down with a bankruptcy attorney, and she was going to file again. And it was because if you have to go through something like that, at least learn the lesson. Right. And change those behaviors. So
yeah, I think that this whole idea of proactivity is really important. We have people who have student loans that are the size of mortgages. And I think that one of the things that we can learn through this pandemic, now that we have some downtime, some of us, is that we can really be proactive about our financial health and literacy.
Yeah.
Even if you might have had a whole bunch of student loans and you're paying them and you think that they're going to be there till you die, you don't have to repeat that cycle with your kids.
Right.
So now you're trying to figure out ways that they can go to school for free if they are going to school, or if they don't have that as their future, to find good trades where, there's a lot of great trades where people make six figures and don't have any degrees at all. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have to really be wise about our financial future and the legacy that we want to leave.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Not everybody is going to necessarily need a four-year college degree to succeed. My husband has a 2-year technical degree and he works at GE and he makes great money, and he basically worked his way through school. So yeah, all of that stuff, it is definitely, it is possible. So, and the one analogy that came to mind, financial health is a lot like physical health. If you're 200 pounds overweight and you smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, you can't expect that doing 2 or 3 things right today means that you're healthy tomorrow or next week. It's all of those boring little habits that you have to do every day that determine your health, whether it's physically or financially, right? So, I have people say like, oh my gosh, like, you're over 45 and you look great and you're in shape. And so how do you do it? And I'm like, I don't smoke. I drink in moderation. I eat a lot of vegetables. I exercise 6 days a week. And that's not what people want to hear, right? But it's the same thing with your finances. It's like, oh, you're in this position. How did you get there? Well, we put 10% into our 401k for the last 20 years, right? These are the little habits that we've done day in and day out, week in and week out. And we can't expect that some miracle pill is going to come and fix that.
That's really, really wise advice. We overcome, we possess land little by little.
Yeah.
And, the questions that the Bible asks us, if you can be trusted with little, be trusted with much. If you can be trusted with somebody else's stuff, you can be trusted with your own. And some of the conversations that we've got to have with ourselves is, can I trust me?
Right.
Would I give me money?
Yeah.
And what would I do with the money I gave me? And how would I account for it? I mean, I would like to, you have a lot of resources that you have available to help. There are all kinds of podcasts that everybody knows about, may not know about, Penny Hoarders, Money Nerds, all the ones that we know about, some, but you also have Disaster Proofing Your Finances webinar.
Yes.
2 books, Money is Emotional and Manage Money Like a Boss.
Yes.
And then you have something called the Money Wellness Lunch and Learn. Is that correct? Am I right?
No, that's just something that I do for typically employers. So I have different groups, different organizations and different companies who will bring me in to speak to their employees about managing emotional spending and how do we save for the future. And so I certainly applaud those company owners who are really leaders and caring for their employees beyond, just the normal salary and benefits. So I think that's pretty cool.
So you can go to your website, which is
ChristineLuken.com.
ChristineLuken.com, and you can find out about all of these resources. We had a question about, is now the right time to invest? Should you wait longer since stocks may not be at their lowest yet? Where do you find places to invest? And we are going to have an entire show about that.
Good.
That show will be on May the 19th. We will have Mark Henn, who is a certified financial planner with Harvest Financial Advisors. So if you are wanting to find out everything about what you should do now to learn how to invest or to protect your investments, on Tuesday Table Talks on May the 19th, Mark will be there. Next Tuesday, we're going to have Candace Hayes McInnes, who is also an accountant, and she's going to be talking specifically to small micro business owners about what they can do to deal with issues about finance that they're struggling with right now. So Christine, I want to give you some opportunity for some final words before we go, and thoughts that you would like to share with the audience.
Oh my gosh. You know what? Start small, but start now. Set up that savings account, start putting in that $10, grab a sheet of paper, sign up for the Ask Zeta app, but start taking those first steps, because you can turn around and start walking towards financial health whenever you want to.
I have a really quick question.
Yes.
The tax filing deadline was extended to July 15th.
Yes.
If a person knew that they were due a refund, would it be wise for them to file now? Should they wait until closer to that time?
You know what? If you think you're going to get a refund, I would go ahead and file. If you think you owe, then maybe it'd be better to wait. I just like to get mine done. Like mine were finished before they even extended. So I'm just one of those people. I like to get that checked off my list.
But if you're going to get a refund and you're getting a refund and you have no savings,
yeah, go ahead and do it.
That would be wise for you to do that. And that could be the beginnings of your emergency fund. You can't use it on a trip. You don't want to go buy a beater car. If you don't have money, take the opportunity, the fact that we're quarantined, to set yourself up for your future.
Yes.
As pastors, we want you to know that God cares about your future, your financial future.
Yes.
A lot of times pastors are talking about how blessed we can be, but we believe that if you follow the principles that are in the scripture, that you will find yourself doing well.
Yes.
Speaking of beaters, one last thing we didn't really tap into is, buying a used car is far better than buying a new one off the lot.
Yeah.
And taking that difference in what you will pay and putting that into savings can go a long way.
Yes. Yeah. I'm a big advocate for paying cash for cars. So I will say, if you're paying cash for your new car, I think that's okay, just because I've done that twice. I basically paid off a car and then I kept saving that payment. Mm-hmm. And then I went and it's not a fancy car. It's a Hyundai Sonata. Mm-hmm. I went and paid cash for one, my first one, like 14 years ago. And then I kept saving that money. And so by the time I was ready to buy my second car with cash, I didn't trade that car in. I sold it to somebody else and I still got like $5,000 out of it. And by the time I bought the car, there was actually still money left over in the savings account. So it can be done, but it takes patience. And that is something that is very rare these days.
That is so true.
Yes.
We thank you for joining us today, Christine. This has been extremely helpful for those that have viewed and for us as well. We are so grateful that you have the time and that you've been able to share your wisdom and expertise. And I hope you all that have been watching will use the resources that she shared. Get the books, get the free download. Real quick before we end, the first 3 chapters of her book. What was that again? Where could they go?
Moneyisemotional.com.
Moneyisemotional.com. So again, we thank Christine Luken.
Thanks for having me.
Tuesday Table Talks. Pastor Sherman, Pastor Sadell, we thank you for joining us. The Warehouse Church family, we thank you all for joining us as well. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.